praise to us. So I'm going to start recording that. And I just would like to say before we start that this panel was sponsored by the Ralph K. Morris Foundation that believes a lot in, youth development and youth and cooperatives, and they do a lot of work in youth education, give out a lot of scholarships. So a huge thanks to the Ralph K. Morris Foundation for bringing us all here to talk about what we love most, which is cooperatives, right? So without further ado, what I'll do is I'll maybe start with Meg and ask if you could introduce yourself and maybe just kind of give a short history of your interactions with cooperatives and where you're at now.
Totally. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so my name is Meg Ronson. I'm currently a project manager at the University of Waterloo at the Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience. The project I manage is called Legacy of Leadership Lab, and it's tying up as a pilot project, but it was funded through the Government of Canada's Investment Readiness Program. So focusing on that social enterprise and investable social enterprise kind of growth and growing the social economy in Canada. And our project specifically was looking at what we're calling social acquisitions. So the conversion of conventional enterprises into co-ops and other social enterprises. Co-ops being our favorite, but we don't like to tell anyone that outside of the co-op sector because we don't want to show favoritism. But Sean Goby and myself are long-standing cooperators. So that's one of my hats. A new hat that I just started putting on is the director of the Co-op Zone training program. So Co-op Zone being for those who aren't familiar, Co-op Zone being what I would call the national association in Canada for co-op developers. And so they have a very successful and thriving training program that I am now the director of. And if you want to know more about that, glad to fill you in. And then the third hat that I've just also started just today, probably just started putting on is I am now a mentee through the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation's Academy. And so I'm working under Denise Guy as the lead co-op developer, and I am kind of her junior co-op developer supporting a group of cooperators building a workers co-op. So those are the three hats. In terms of my history with cooperatives in general, it was a long journey. I started just as a member at a food co-op in Toronto called Karma. It's one of the oldest of its kind in certainly in the city, potentially in the province, maybe the country, not sure. But yeah, very, very long-standing cooperative. Absolutely fell in love with it. And ever since, I've just kind of been climbing my way up and up in terms of my leadership and influence with the cooperative sector, primarily through the avenue of economic development. I hold a master's of economic development at the University of Waterloo. So looking at cooperatives as just a very vibrant, awesome, malleable model for all different kinds of ways of just growing our economy more equitably. The school at the University of Waterloo is absolutely the right place to have done that because a lot of researchers at the university are very much advancing social economy practices. So sorry, that was very long. Over to Sarah, I believe.
Yeah, that was great. Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Meg, for the introduction. So hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Jensen. I like to say that I started with cooperatives as a 7-year-old because that's when I moved into the housing cooperative that I grew up in. I'm still very lucky to live here today in my own apartment now. So that's sort of my one first and current hat that I wear as a director on the board of directors there. I'm also the treasurer. And that's a position that's very near and dear to my heart. I was one of the youngest directors to get elected to the board in our co-op's 50-year history, and housing cooperatives really shaped, growing up in housing cooperative really shaped my dedication to the cooperative model and just my sense of commitment to community and, putting people and planet before profit. Which is really what I see the cooperative sector as being about. Since then, I've worn a million other hats. I currently work for the Ontario Cooperative Association as their Cooperative Young Leaders Program Youth Engagement Coordinator, which is a ridiculously long title to say that I help run their summer camp for students 14 to 18 and do a lot of work with cooperative education with them. I also am a director on CHF Canada's board of directors, newly elected last week at their AGM, which is super exciting. And before that, I sat on their Ontario Council. I sit with Meg and Michael on the Canada's Emerging Cooperators Committee, which is a committee for youth under the age of 35 here in Canada who are involved in the cooperative sector. And oh goodness, I also am one of 25 voices for the International Cooperative Alliances. Wow, acronyms. International Cooperative Alliances 25 Voices Under 25 project, which is a project looking to unite young cooperators under 25 around the world to celebrate our upcoming Congress in Korea in December. And I think that that's all the hats that I wear. But if I remember anything else, I will update you.
Sarah's baseball card always intimidates me.
So just 99 overall everywhere, just all the way down. It's like 5 stars.
It's crazy.
Well, thank you so much, Meg and Sarah, for the introductions. We clearly have a lot of talent on the call with regards to cooperatives. And I also appreciate kind of, the context that you gave, which with regards to how, you got involved with cooperatives. But I was wondering if you could just maybe contextualize a little bit more, how you got involved in cooperatives and then how you got involved with CEC after that and how you saw the value of that. Because, that's one thing that brings all three of us together here is the fact that we're on Canada's Emerging Cooperators. And just where do you see the value in that? Maybe what I'll do is I'll go back to Sarah and then after that I'll go to Meg.
Yeah, for sure. So I like to say that my first cooperative mentor was my mom. She was the one who was like making sure that I had, I was the door greeter at Castle Green events in my housing cooperative, or, I was handing out napkins or something and always being involved. And that really got my drive for community spirit and, sort of being the change I wished to see in the world from the time I was really small. From there, I went to the Cooperative Young Leaders Program, which I now work for. And that was really my first taste of cooperative spirit outside my housing co-op. I always knew that like growing up in a housing co-op, that was like, to me, that was a unique experience to have that deep sense of community and connection to other people. And the CYL program was my first taste of experiencing that with peers my own age in the space of 1 week. So that program absolutely revolutionized my idea of the cooperative sector and how incredibly powerful it can be for community building and just like that real human connection between people. And so when I applied to be on CEC, that was kind of the connection I was looking for, was that space to connect with other young cooperators across Canada, to network, to build our influence, and to help other young people see the value of the cooperative sector as an answer to a lot of our issues in the world today. I think young people are looking for ways to get involved and to make the world a better place, and that cooperatives are one of the most unique and perhaps one of the most effective tools that we can use to sort of bridge those gaps and address those issues. And so that's what I hope to do with my work on CEC.
Meg?
Cool. There's no one thread, I think, for me in the same way that there is for Sarah. I think, especially since I came to cooperatives like in my 20s, like I was like, an adult when I finally discovered co-ops. So I think for me, like I was like technically not technically a youth, but like depending on how you define youth, I was like older than what some people would call youths. So, and I honestly, I've never been much of a joiner. Sarah, definitely a joiner. Me, less so, right? And so, because when I only join things that I'm really, really passionate about, which means that, if there are volunteer opportunities that I'm like, I don't know about that, I won't go for it. And I think that is why CEC is Canada's Emerging Cooperators, it was such a natural fit for me because it was so obviously where I was at in terms of my values and then to bring it back to engaging youth. I think that because I'm that non-joiner, I'm also looking for other people who are kind of non-joiners as well, but are looking for their tribe. And I think that that's the amazing thing about cooperatives, is because you can make your own. You can just compile together groups of people that aren't really, not necessarily joiners, maybe some of them are, but you can come together and create your own tribe that is based in kind of sustainable principles and is about community and longevity and resilience, and or you know, you can make it anything you want, and you can do it in a really practical market-based way, which is, I think, a really one of the biggest values that I see young people being super attracted to, like that economic participation part. For me, that's, I think, where the kids should be coming in droves, because the economic fragilities that we are all dealing with in this modern era. I sound like an old lady, but it's true. You know, young people are so whip smart. They're so plugged in. They're so connected, and they are, like Sarah said, they're looking for ways to meaningfully connect and impact the world. And the great thing about co-ops that other solutions don't have is that tribe aspect, that ability to kind of come together and connect in a really tangible way. That's not quite the same as, like, you know, volunteering for a political campaign, or um, you know, joining a Twitch chat, or I don't even know what the,
Live stream.
yeah, like those things that the kids do now that make the, you know, that get them fired up, that get them feeling like a community. The great thing about cooperative communities is that there's that practical embeddedness in the economy in a really concrete way. And I think, yeah, it just ties everything together quite neatly when it comes to uh, yeah, engagement, community economics, all of that good stuff.
So if I can throw the question back at you, Meg, because you know I have the luxury of knowing that you're under, you know, you're leading out our strategic planning process at CEC. So you know, applying that, what does that look like to you?
Applying strategic planning. Sorry, rephrase the question slightly for me here.
So you're leading our strategic planning process at CEC, because you know we all know around the table here that CEC has a value proposition and a value add when it comes to engaging youth in cooperation in Canada, especially when it comes to, you know, our overarching organization CNC. How are we positioning ourselves at CEC, and what have you seen throughout this strategic planning process that has really stuck out to you?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Oh man. I mean, so at CEC we have a Slack channel, and we use it primarily just to kind of keep in touch with one another, usually share some news, or, you know, oh, there's this job posting that you guys might want to see, or things like that. But what the strategic planning, I call them the dream team, the strategic planning dream team, has started to do is really poke at some of those like burning questions that a lot of CEC members have very strong feelings about, very strong answers for, and putting them in a Slack channel that's just called strategic planning. And yeah, we just post a question every few days to just elicit some conversation. And boy, oh boy, does it elicit conversation. Like the answers that people come up with are so mind-blowingly complex and articulate, and there's so many layers to these conversations. And it's a simple question, like, you know, how should we, like, what are the best ways for CEC members to, what are the best ways to engage CEC members to make sure that when a CEC member joins CEC, that they are in fact engaged and are doing the things that make them a CEC member? That was like a question, and then there were like 4 answers, and everyone had like a slightly different answer, and everyone was typing just these like essays to answer that question. And that alone can tell you just how opinionated the young people are, and educated, and like smart, and passionate, and that's really what it is for me, is it's like people have a lot of things to say, and they don't always agree, and they know some people know how to disagree and do it thoughtfully and do it respectfully, and then say, okay, so we disagree on these things. Let's, what does that mean for the next, right? Like, what does that mean after, right? I think, I think there's a lot of that. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Meg. So maybe we'll go with 3 more questions, and then we can invite some of our attendees up onto the stage to have more of a conversation. But I'm going to go back to you, Sarah, with a question kind of related to the strategic plan, but a little bit bigger. And the question I want to ask you is, how do we engage more youth in cooperatives?
Oh man, what a loaded question. I could give you like an essay response that's hours long, I'm sure. I think for me, particularly as a young person, and particularly as someone who joined the sector very young, it's exactly what Meg was talking about. It's valuing youth, not just as youth voices, but as expert voices in their field, as very intelligent, well-educated people who can contribute to the sector. And it's very important to engage youth, but it's very important to engage youth on a level that also isn't just like, you're a youth, you're in the youth spot, you get to speak only when we're talking about youth and on no other issues, kind of thing. I think, like I already said this, but I think that young people are more aware, perhaps because of social media, perhaps because of access to the internet, than perhaps any other generation in history, just because we have access to information about the issues that are going on today, and are extremely passionate about those issues and what we can do to change things, and what we can do to make things better and have more equitable practices in our workplaces, in our economy, in our social settings. And I think engaging on youth on that genuine level and really bringing them into every conversation, not just conversations surrounding youth, is so important. And I think too, it's about, perhaps this is biased because I am a cooperative educator, but it's about education. I know so many people, like, for example, I'm in a pre-law program, and I interact with, it's a political science pre-law program. And so I interact with a lot of very politically minded youth who are super passionate about changing the world. And I have not met okay, that's not true. I've met one person in my 3 years in university that knew what a cooperative is, that was my age. And every other person that I've told about cooperatives, they've been like, oh my God, how did I not know about this? This is exactly what I'm looking for. This is exactly what I want to be involved with. This is exactly the type of world that I want to live in. I want to live in a world where I have democratic control over my economy. I want to live in a world with economic equity and the social equity piece that comes with cooperatives, and a strong sense of community and a connection to other people on a human level, beyond just looking at a person as a dollar sign and a number on an employee sheet. And so I think, young people are out there, they're passionate about these issues. They should be included in every conversation, and they should be valued for their contributions. And we should get the word out there about cooperatives to young people, because they're looking for this solution, and they want to be a part of it.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Meg, do you want to add anything to that before we move on?
I could not have said it even close to as good as what Sarah just said.
Okay. Well, so now I'm going to ask maybe a little bit less of a relevant question to cooperatives, but more of a question on career development. And so, Meg, if you could tell me, you've just been named to this program director position with Co-op Zone in the training program. Now, how does that fit into your 5-year plan, and where do you see yourself in 5 years with regards to your career?
So yeah, to let people peek behind the curtain a little bit, Michael did share some of the questions he'd be asking us. And this was the one question that I immediately was like, oh, I'm not going to have an answer to that. Just because, and for a few reasons. One is, I don't think I've ever had a 5-year plan. And 2, more than ever, it's impossible to plan more than like 6 months max into the future because of the pandemic, mostly, but also just because things are shifting all the time. So I'll give you a half answer, which is that I expect that over the next 5 years, I will behave in such a way as to you kind of like, here's the thing about like 5-year plans. I don't think you can do them anymore. In the same way that like when I was helping, with the strategic planning for the CEC, Josh, our director, or what's his title? Our chair?
He's a chair.
Okay. He acts like such a director, like, anyway, so our chair, Josh, was like, okay, I want a strategic plan that at least goes for the next 3 years. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. But the more I started, massaging the data, the more I was kind of like, we should probably do like one, like pretty good idea, 2 sort of idea, and then like 3rd year, like, maybe this direction. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, so what I'm trying to say, Michael, and I'm sorry for like ripping apart your question, but it's kind of like my intention is always to look for and respond to emergence. And so the most accurate answer I can have to that question is like, I will be doing as much as I can to grow the co-op sector in Canada, whatever that looks like in 5 years. But depending on my actions, depending on your actions, and Sarah's actions, and all these institutional actors that are acting, and the government and the way that they are shift over the next 5 years, which could be dramatic. There's a lot going on right now. What I think I might be doing in 5 years might not be the best. Might not be the best decision. It might not even be in the ballpark of what is important. So, if I could hazard a guess, I would say that at that point, in the sort of distant future, and for me, 5 years is distant future, because I really do think like 3 months at a time. I hope to have, really, for me, that like, especially with Co-op Zone, it's all about those co-op developers, and making sure that when people want to form co-ops, that they know how to find co-op developers, that those co-op developers are there, and that those co-op developers have the expertise to actually support the development of co-ops. I want to see a pan-Canadian network of like really like well connected and active and self-sustaining network of co-op developers that is at the ready, and also actively promoting co-op development as well, because I think that's the other thing, is like when you have this currently the Canadian co-op development network is quite dispersed. It's also like, and no one will be mad at me for saying this, it's really old. Like, there are a lot of retired co-op developers in our network that are looking to pass on their knowledge, because they're past retirement age, and they're still working because they know that if they leave the market, there's no one to replace them, or very few to replace them. So yeah, there's work to be done, but I'm looking very much forward to having this network that's poised not only to help, but to support the growth and push for the growth of co-ops. Sorry that I talk a lot.
Great. No, absolutely. Thanks, Meg. And so we can hope to see great things as long as they emerge in the co-op sector. Sarah, I was wondering if I could ask you the same question.
Okay, first I want to say thank you, Meg, for going first, because when I read the 5-year question, that was exactly what went through my head. I was like, does any young person these days actually believe in a 5-year plan, or do they just have like an answer that they give out at job interviews? Because that was what I was going to give you. So I appreciate the honesty, because I agree. I think that that's part of my 5-year plan, honestly, is like this idea that times are so turbulent and there's a lot of economic instability. I mean, the pandemic really, I think, exacerbated and blew those issues to the forefront, but I think that they already existed. And I think that it's really hard for young people to think 5 years in advance when we don't know, like, for example, like, I'm in university. I don't know if my path is going to be have a job right out of university, if my path is going to be, to go back to grad school. or to law school since I'm in the pre-law program, or what is going to be most economically and economically feasible and wisest for my career path. And then also what is going to be my position in terms of how I'm going to be best serving my goals of looking towards that economic transformation and serving human rights when those issues are so currently developing, day by day and week by week and month by month. And so I think, yeah, like the sentiment that we would have a 5-year plan doesn't resonate with a lot of young people when we can't see what next week will bring or what next month will bring. And so I agree with that. As for sort of what my outline of my 5-year plan is, I don't have any specifics, but I can say that I'm definitely still going to be working in the cooperative sector, either volunteer or hopefully in my career in the next 5 years, because I can't imagine my life without cooperatives and without this movement and this sector and the incredible people that I've met and the vision that we share to work on that economic transformation that can lead to hopefully having 5-year plans in the future be more feasible options. So I think certainly my 5-year plan includes continuing to stick to my values and my roots and build community in all that I do, work for human rights, and push the cooperative model as a tool with which we can find those solutions. And yeah, so that's my 5-year plan in a nutshell, on a very broad overarching sort of theme of just putting cooperation into everything that I do.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, Meg. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invite people up on stage now so we can have a little bit more of a conversation. And I think what has really resonated from this is that, you are both doing phenomenal things in the cooperative sector and will continue to do phenomenal things in the cooperative sector, at least for the next 5 years. And so without further ado, maybe we can open up into a conversation of what exactly that looks like. So I'll invite people up onto the stage now.
Yeah, with such a small group, it's a good idea to just have everyone jump on in.
Okay, so you all should be able to turn on your cameras as well as your microphones. If you would like to join the conversation, you are more than welcome to do so.
Can I ask for some introductions as well, so that because these are names that I don't recognize, so it's exciting.
We have good representation from the US tonight.
Great.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is Madeline Schultz. I work for Iowa State University. I'm here in Ames, Iowa tonight, and just wanted to pop in and say hello. It's wonderful to see, all the enthusiasm that our young people have for cooperatives and all the great work you're doing. So keep up the good work, and I'm just here to support you all.
Thanks, Madeline. Roberta?
So I'm Bobby Severson. I am with Cornell University. I'm director of the Cooperative Enterprise Program there and executive secretary of the Northeast Co-op Council. And when I think about what we're doing with students and youth to encourage people to understand the cooperative business model a little bit more, we in our cooperative business, we teach cooperative business class in the Dyson College of Applied Economics and Management, which is inside a business school at Cornell. And we have about 30 students. And earlier this afternoon, one of the sessions, we were talking about this whole idea of the UN's initiatives on sustainability. And in the Dyson School, we actually have this Grand Challenge course now, or Grand Challenge. It's called the Grand Challenge, where there's classes that address these UN goals, global goals, and the cooperative business management class was named as one of those classes that will support this initiative now. The other thing we do inside the class is that we flip the classroom so that, and I recognize it's really, really hard because the students that are in the classroom, especially this year, do not have any idea what a cooperative is. And so we encourage them to read ahead and become like student study groups to work with cooperatives that are having different kinds of issues. We've done like member education pieces for Ocean Spray and for National Grape, which is the Welch's brand. And we've even worked with like marketing agreements with small agricultural cooperatives. And the class tends to be a little bit more ag focused than it is other, than it is credit unions or, food co-ops or that sort of thing. The other thing, and the other hat, it's interesting how we all wear these different hats, is that the Northeast Co-op Council, and I'm listening to your stories, and I think about my journey, which, started in the co-op world when I was 14 years old, to be perfectly honest. And my parents were members of co-ops, but, and one of the things at the time was that I ended up receiving like scholarships and opportunities through the New York State Council of Co-ops. And when I got to my new position at the Northeast Co-op Council, there was like no opportunities for students. And so I've worked to bring that back. This year was really pleased to do a case study in our virtual meeting. And actually, I had some Cornell students and I had some students from another college, which helped me to present the case. They eavesdropped on the conversations, they took notes, and then they were the ones that reported back to the full conference. And I got some really positive remarks in the evaluations. I think, and one of the reasons why I'm here in this conversation tonight is that I do work mostly with agricultural cooperatives, and my cooperative leaders are like, we need to engage our members more, especially our young members, but between working on their farm, family arrangements, or family commitments, they don't have a lot of time. And when we try to do something that, shall we say, co-op-y in nature, it's kind of like, they don't want to hear that. So I'm kind of interested in how, creative ways to provide that kind of education that would draw them in. So sorry for my very long introduction.
That's a great question, though. I don't know if Meg or Sarah have any response to that, but I think that's a big question that even CEC is grappling with a little bit, right? Because we're also looking to engage youth and young professionals in our council. And so, there is a job of, educating and bringing them into our organization to kind of groom them to be the next cooperative leaders as well, right?
Yeah, my feeling is, and after, I'd love to hear from Gary and William as well. Yeah, my hunch is always that providing examples of successful engagement to youth is like successful youth run co-ops to me is kind of like the storytelling aspect is usually a really great way to engage people. So anytime there's examples of I feel like there are tons of student owned co-ops in Quebec, right? And that's the thing. And I'm sure it's the case in certain areas of the United States as well. But yeah, obviously, you folks in the room probably know Quebec is the mecca of cooperation in Canada. So.
I don't know if you have anything more, Meg, but my two recommendations are always, one, if you have younger people in your cooperatives, like for example, the summer camp in my area is for 14 to 18. And if you have the opportunity to send them to existing education and co-op camp programs, absolutely do that. Make sure your co-op is sponsoring them. Even if you're not sponsoring, like if you have kids that are directly connected to your co-op, absolutely. Like if they're children of farmers in your cooperative, send them. If they're children of staff, send them, but go into your local schools too and say like, hey, we want to send you to camp this summer. That's how you get kids involved. And I know so many kids who had no idea what a co-op was, even if their parents worked in a co-op, who went to co-op summer camp, the one that I'm involved with, and were just like mind blown. They were like, I don't know what this is. I'm not interested. I don't care. And at the end of the week, they were like, how do I get back here as quickly as possible? And I know for me, like I was already very involved as a cooperator before I went to summer camp, but a lot of my peers at camp had no idea and are still people who work in the cooperative sector around me now, and who like showed up first day of camp and were like, I don't want to be here. Why am I here? So that's a great way to get kids involved is get them involved young. Find out about your local co-op camps, and if there isn't a local co-op camp, set one up. There's tons of resources I would be more than happy to point you to, if there isn't one. And two is, if you're looking to hire people, look to hire youth. I think a lot of engagement issues, particularly with youth in the 18 plus category, is that they just don't have the time and the energy to dedicate time to volunteering in positions while they're working, you know, a job or 2 jobs or 3 jobs to make ends meet and going to school and everything else. So I always recommend that if you're looking to get youth involved in your organizations, hire them, find positions for them, get state, or in my case, provincial or federal funding to hire youth into your cooperative at every opportunity, and provide them with those opportunities to have gainful employment within your cooperative, because that's the best connection we can have is setting up that next generation of professionals in the cooperative sector, while also providing, you know, stable, important jobs in our economy, and allowing young people that space to be able to contribute in a meaningful way through their employment, while also making sure that they're not having to stress about whether or not they have lights on and a roof over their head.
Actually, you bring up a good point. In this fall, I've got a new project that I'm starting, which is we're going to be working a little bit more in the worker-owned co-op space. And there is a component this year where we don't have that curriculum for, let's say, high school youth as far as teaching anything about co-ops. And so actually we're going to, and part of the premise around this employee-owned cooperatives is, and one of our class projects was working with Ace Hardware store in the Catskill Mountain area that was looking to they didn't have the proprietor, the owner didn't have a next generation buyer. So consequently, the workers are taking it over and they're going to buy it. So that became one of the class projects. But it became very apparent that, you know, people don't know about co-ops in rural areas. So rural schools of New York State is going to become involved with this, along with New York State FFA. So I think that'll be a new road for that, shall we say, teen audience that we haven't seen before. So Sue William, I'm still working at it here, okay?
Hey, can I jump in? So I was really intrigued by the question that was asked of you, Megan, and Sarah about the 5-year plans. And I noticed it felt like it was hard for you to answer them, but I think you did it the only way you could, which is sort of to say, I don't know, but I'm going to keep learning. And I want to share a couple of anecdotes with you that I was reminded of. One of my graduate degrees is in studies of the future. And I got the master's degree from the University of Houston, Clear Lake City in 1979. And and it was basically the issue was, can you predict the future? Can you shape it, et cetera? And the answer, of course, is you can't predict it, but you can know a lot more. And there's no point going on there. But two things came out of it. One is I had a part-time job started out as a bouncer in a bookmobile in the city of Pasadena, Texas. And it was a city of 100,000 on the outskirts of Houston. And I don't know if you would remember the TV show Dallas, but Dallas was really about Houston. In many ways, it was the antithesis of today. The growth was immense, oil, chemicals, everything, all kinds of problems. The public school system on Labor Day had to hire 400 teachers just to, meet the demand of all the kids moving in. And they didn't have to, they had no certificates or anything. But I got interested in cooperatives. And the only thing I really knew was what I had been reading about. So on the day that I left, the bouncer was necessary. Okay, we went into rough neighborhoods, but the driver quit. And so I was now both driver and bouncer. And I had a practice of giving any kid, these are all Mexican-American kids or Latinx, whatever they were referred to then, and parents, and none of them had any identification. I gave them all library cards. And I've often wondered if they were able to extend the use of the library card into other means of identification. I hope so. But on the day that I left to come back to Minnesota, I met with the director of the library. His name was Roman Boachevsky, and he was really a sharp guy. He was also on the Chamber of Commerce for the city of Houston. And I explained to him what I was going to be doing when I left, finished my degree, which was cooperative education. So as I was trying to explain this to him, he said, this really sounds interesting, but until you can get your story down, your message, to the point where you could come to the Chamber of Commerce of Houston, Texas, and convince them, that's what your goal needs to be. And I've honestly been working on it ever since. The second thing, though, was I had an opportunity to do an internship with NASA or the Congressional Clearinghouse in the future. And I just went in to talk to one of my sociology professors, explaining what I was interested in. And he said, I could see you in 10 years teaching at a small rural college in the Midwest. I had never thought of that, but 6 months later, that's what I was doing. And I worked for 13 years in the University of Minnesota. I really got started in teaching cooperatives and all of that. The college closed. I actually am an associate professor emeritus. And this next year will be my 30th year. So I decided in April that I'm going to take a sabbatical. So I'm now on sabbatical for the rest of the year. And in terms of a 5-year plan, I tell people that I'm in the post-employment phase of my career. Okay, so I serve on a bunch of foundation boards and various things. But sort of an overall thing that happened to me was for the 13 years that I was in the university, and then a good part of the next 20 some years at Senex and then CHS, I really was what I would call a professional cooperative educator. But it gradually evolved into the development, the foundation side. So today I am extremely pleased to see what ACE is doing and the programs at St. Mary's and the e-co-op thing that Aaron works on and all of that. It's, as a field, we're in much better shape than we've ever been. But I'm still concerned about how we pay for this. And with that, I want to mention to Gary, who asked a really good question last night. Gary's question, this was on a group discussion with E.G. Nadeau. E.G. actually raised it and mentioned to Sarah Lloyd from Wisconsin Farmers Union about, didn't Farmers Union have a program where they paid for education? And she had part of the answer. And then Gary followed up with a question that we didn't have time to answer, which I'll just paraphrase Gary here, and maybe you can elaborate, is how do we pay for this and invest in this. And by the way, I'm really glad to hear about, did you call it Co-op Zone? Yeah, so great. That's great news to hear. So I've been aware, and I know Madeline has, and Roberta, quite a bit about the co-op development efforts in the US, the funding and all of that. But the funding of education is a different matter. And for many years, certainly up until the time that I left the CHS Foundation, we were the largest funder in the US in educational cooperatives. And I'm no longer in that role, but I'm now one of my main role really is serving as the chair of the board of the Ralph Morris Foundation. So continuing to explore that. And the broader question is, how are young people in the future going to earn a living? You know, we do keep doing everything we can do to automate, you know, I mean, even trying to replace taxi drive. I mean, I'm not against automation, but the reality is with 8 billion people, or even the 7 point we have now, there's got to be a way for people to earn a living, okay? You know, we're here in the States are struggling over federal minimum wage, which is technically what it was about 20 years ago. And the reason I mentioned the Farmers Union story is because when the predecessor, Harvest States and Cenex were formed in the 1930s, they adopted a provision in which I think it was 5% of all the earnings would go into education. That continued for decades. And then in the 1980s, it started to run into a problem which Sarah referred to a little bit last night, but basically what was happening was both those companies were growing. They were expanding into territories outside of the traditional Farmers Union range. And of course, their competitors were the Grange and Farm Bureau. Grange definitely had an interest in cooperatives. Farm Bureau, they did, but it was a totally different model, much more agribusiness oriented. And that's the case today. Anyway, there became a need to make a change in that program, and Harvest States decided to just eliminate it, which resulted in lawsuits and board positions being lost. Cenex, though, decided to create a program that they wanted to be permanent called the Cooperative Education Grants Program. And they hired me to run it. Again, I had tenure in the university. The university was closing, but I opted out and did that. And we developed protocols and it grew over time. That program still exists, but they're not putting as much money into it. And they've got other kinds of interests. And so one of the things, and I won't go deep into the strategies here, but my comment last night to Michael and Gary is I think this would be a worthy topic for an ACE webinar targeted to how do we fund cooperative education. You know, right now, Ralph Morris is experimenting with stuff and you get sponsorships and you get, you know, there isn't really well, the Farmers Union thing was what we would have called a checkoff before. There are big changes going on in the US with the Co-op Development Foundation with Leslie Mead retiring. However, they've hired her replacement and I think she'll be very good. But we need to address not only, we need to address this, okay? I'll just say that. But what we always did at CHS was we tried to tie it to careers, but the careers were not necessarily in cooperatives, okay? And that was one of the reasons why we weren't very supportive of the program at St. Mary's. And the reason was, and this is my old self, is, you know, we weren't finding young people coming out of colleges and universities that said, I want to work in a co-op. What they wanted was a job. They wanted to stay in the rural community. They wanted to have animals. They wanted to be crop people, you name it. I spent a fair amount of time trying to convince animal science people to think more towards plants because animals got to eat plants. And that's way understated compared to what it is today. You know, plants are going to rule the world, I hope. And we've got to deal with that. But anyway, there are a lot of ways to do it. The college conference has been a good part of it. And, you know, I've had the good fortune of working with Bobby over the years and Madeline in different roles. And I really want to commend you for the CEC. We tried in the CHS Foundation to fund a number of youth initiatives. The only one that really worked were the Farmers Union camping programs, of which Kathy's, Kathy's doing triple duty tonight, I think, on that, just because we've got a worker shortage here. But there were a number of challenges we had in that people aged out. Many of the people who were starting the initiatives, by the time they got them organized, they were too old to participate. And then you start to throw in the gig economy and all of that. Much of that history is irrelevant because we're in a different world today. And I think, I'm really glad to see you're doing that. And I don't disagree at all. I know there's a lot of latent interest out there, but if we can find ways to collaborate and learn from the past and grow in the future, we can all benefit from it. But anyway, thanks for letting me be part of the program tonight.
Thanks, William. Gary, did you want to introduce yourself? Last but not least.
Sure. I think I accidentally hit panelist versus staying as an attendee, but I'm glad I did. Gary Hampton, I'm out of Charleston, West Virginia, and I just recently joined Cooperation Works as Program Director of the Arts and Sciences program. Been around co-ops, introduced in late 2018 and started attending trainings and functions with Cooperation Works or Sea Commons, Cooperation Appalachia, and which is now New West Virginia. And did some consulting also within the co-op sector as well as an independent consultant. And I'm here today. So I'm pleased to continue to learn more and see how, my talent, skills, knowledge can grow and contribute to the challenges of the ecosystem and to help it thrive.
Great. Thanks so much, Gary.
Thanks.
Lots of interesting people on the call this evening. I realize we're getting close to 8 p.m., but I really did want to say, William, I think the initiative is a good one, and CEC is an advisory committee of CMC. That's the way we're structured. I know a couple of years back there was a movement in the United States that Erin Hancock, and she was on the call, but she had to bug out, was championing with a few people in the States called the USCYC, I believe it was called. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but I think the acronym stood for the US Co-op Youth Council. I believe that's what it was. They still have a Facebook page with quite a significant following, but they don't seem to be active. Have you heard of that, William?
Yeah, I'm gonna be real careful here about what I say because I don't want to take too long. But yeah, I'm deeply involved with it and the issues. And quite frankly, I got involved because we meaning the CHS Foundation, were getting a lot of the requests. And there were typically anywhere from 4 to 6 different efforts going on. And I took it upon myself to sort of play a coaching role. So when they would come and ask for funds, they were all shoestring, as you can imagine, not well-versed in grant writing or anything. And I would coach them. I would invite them to submit a Word document that we could then edit together. And we found ways in most cases to fund them. But, it was clear just from seeing the landscape that there was some crossovers, and some were participating in more than one, but there was just very unlikely they were all going to succeed. And if I went down the list, if someone put it in front of me, and by the way, Kathy could do the same thing. I could identify what went wrong or what worked in each one of them. A couple of them were, quite frankly, tragic situations, dealing with individuals who ended up getting way too visible on Facebook. And, it's one of those things where those of us kind of watching this thing, like the bad car accident, saying, don't let this happen, but it did. And, another key one, got married, and it was an international thing. She's now the education director for Mississippi Market and still very interested, but also a very busy young mother. And I'm just mentioning that many of the participants in these organizations were women. And I don't think our society here in the States, and you'd probably agree with me in Canada, that we've been very fair to women in terms of moving through the career paths and all of that. It's changing, definitely, but ACE itself, you could write a chapter on a book of board members and others who were marginalized because of being female and then not being able to move up in their organizations, or trying to be a mother and all those kind of things. And so hopefully we're all a lot more aware now. And we had no racial diversity at all, but that's changing. And I have loved the discussions about Indigenous. I heard even the speaker last night, I think Michael mentioned, or yesterday on the Indigenous, that more of us now are acknowledging that we're living on land that was occupied before we moved people out of it. And we have a lot of people in the States, at least, who are terribly frightened of being marginalized because they happen to be white and are, starting to recognize that the world is changing. But I need to refrain from saying more because I'm trying to be more reticent. Last year, I adopted a slogan I saw by the airport, which was, if you see something, say something. And so I did not for the whole year, and even to this year, participate in a discussion in which I did not find a way to bring up the importance of all of us getting involved politically. And so I finally mentioned to someone, Margaret Bow, I think it was, that I figured out what I would be if I could be something else, and that was going to be a murder hornet. And I would attend Trump rallies and sneak up on his supporters. So I didn't do that, but dang it, if it happens again, I'll be there. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, William.
There were a few interesting resources put in the chat. Meg talked about, I know it is PPE in French, but IRP, the Investment Readiness Program, which is born out of the Social Finance Fund in Canada. And then I know we also have, for co-op education, ECEF within CEC, which is actually a really cool initiative. Maybe Sarah and Meg, you want to share a little bit more about those initiatives for our US counterparts, and then we can wrap it up here. Sarah?
Sure.
Oh, Megan?
Sure.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, sure. Sorry. So I was actually part of the development team for the Emerging Cooperators Education Fund. 3 years ago, we had $100,000 that had kind of been put into a lump sum to use for sending youth to conferences across Canada. And it was decided that those funds would be reallocated to a project of the Canada's Emerging Cooperators design. And what we came up with was an education fund where youth can, under the age of 35, can apply to pretty much further their education in any way they can creatively imagine in the cooperative sector. So whether that's pursuing a degree in cooperative education, whether that is attending conferences, whether that is developing their own projects surrounding educating other youth. So it's a very broad program. We sort of invite a lot of different projects to apply, and the deadline for our next round is July 15th. So it's still a concurrent ongoing project. I don't have the stats off the top of my head of how many people who have successfully applied and had their projects done. But if you wanted to check that out, actually I'll plug our social media in here too, because we've been throwing up lots of posts about ECEF recipients. And I obviously, since all of you are calling in from the States, that program probably doesn't apply to you, but it might be a program that you might want to emulate because it has that broadness and because it invites that idea of creativity. It allows young cooperators and actually young people outside of the cooperative sector to think about how cooperatives can apply to their education and their career advancement. And so it's something you might want to take a look at in terms of a policy development and funding development perspective. And I think certainly the broadness of the program is something that's unique. I know I've seen a lot of like scholarship programs that are specific to like cooperative sponsoring scholarships for students who are looking to pursue cooperative education in some form or another. But I haven't seen a program like this that's as broad, that invites young people to come up with their own ideas on how they can further their education and advance the cooperative sector.
What was the name of that again, please?
It's the Emerging Cooperators Education Fund. I did put it might be a little bit back in the chat, but I did put the link to it on our website in the chat, and I can put our social media handles as well, because we have been posting a lot about it as we've been currently selecting candidates for the funding. Yeah.
Sarah, I appreciate you mentioning that, you know, you've got eligibility requirements, but it's still good to let other people know about it because they may be able to emulate it. And one of the things we did this past year during the pandemic with the Ralph Morris Foundation, because we weren't able to fund scholarships because there weren't any events, is we set up a special committee and brought in a couple of other people not on the board to just sort of monitor what was going on. And so one of the things that we were noticing was that more organizations seem to be offering scholarships as part of their programs. And, you know, any event has always, you know, had student discounts and all of that. But the Wisconsin Center for Co-ops, for example, and the Farmer Co-ops has gotten like two internally, a fund set up and then another, and then we added to that. Cooperation Works, I think we are one of, Gary, you may know the details here, of at least 3 contributors to it. One of the things that I've talked to Bobby about in the Northeast was, you know, we get students from Cornell, for example, who come to the Twin Cities for the college conference on co-ops. But some of the regional co-ops out in the Northeast are also in the Midwest, you know, DFA and Land O'Lakes and CoBank, and then some are not. But, you know, we're hoping that some of the lessons we're learning with Ralph Morris, which we're learning from you folks, we can then pass on to, for example, members of the Northeast Council who, except for Bobby, would not be aware of this. So, you know, I know Bobby's got a full plate too, but sometimes all it takes is one example. And I'll use CoBank as an example. They've become, I think, a very generous supporter of co-op education, but they, like many people, people just don't know how to do it, you know, and that's not a criticism. It's just, you know, if you're in a company, there's probably at best only one of me, you know, or I had, you know, 3 staff people, but, you know, most of the people in the company are selling fertilizer or marketing grain or who knows what, and they just don't think about these things. So when they're out hiring a student, if they can pick up somebody who's been through the college conference on co-ops, or, you know, did an internship in a co-op, not because it was a co-op, but because it was available. And then they say, hey, this is kind of cool, you know, it's farmer owned. So now they're in a, you know, in an office building or maybe out in the country, and they've got a better awareness of what a co-op is than the other employees, you know, and, you know, some of them, and they do become the manager or the board chair, you know, they grow up in it. And then, you know, when they get asked to support young people, they get it right away. So you're influencing a lot of people even beyond the official hat, quote unquote, that you wear. That's just the way it is, you know, and it's exciting if you don't let it drive you crazy.
Meg, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Oh, yeah, just to contextualize my links that I put in there. In terms of like Canada's social enterprise policies, the Trudeau government has been pushing forward actions around the Social Finance Fund. So if you're not familiar with that down in the US, I definitely suggest you take a look at it, because in terms of just policy work in that respect, I admit I'm not familiar with Biden's movement on the social economy in the United States, or if it's more of social economy is probably maybe more of a state by state situation. But here in Canada, the federal government has had a lot of influence on growing the social sector and getting it to a point where investment is possible. So in terms of financing the education of cooperativism and cooperative principles and things like that, the cooperative sector, particularly through Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, which, as you know, is CEC's parent organization. There's a lot of there's been there's been activity that's leveraging that investment that the government of Canada has put in and turning it into opportunities to teach cooperativism, but I don't want to make a thing out of it, and I know we're eight minutes past our end time, so yeah.
Quick question, Michael, are the Puerto Ricans very involved in ACE right now?
Yep.
Good.
Yeah, Seguros Múltiples, and we have 3 other member credit unions in Puerto Rico.
There was a time where whenever we would have an ACE Institute and we all talked about our youth programs, Canadians had a lot to be proud of. The US did. I mean, the states. The Puerto Ricans would outdo us every time. I mean, what they were doing was phenomenal. And we all come home saying, boy, how can we learn from them?
Nice.
Well, if you want to be put in that position again, they're presenting tomorrow afternoon.
Oh, awesome.
Okay. Oh, yeah, right. I saw that on the program. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll try and join in.
All right. Well, thank you so
Michael?
much, everyone. I appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate you taking the time to maybe learn more about CEC and the amazing things that Meg and Sarah are doing for cooperatives in Ontario as well as abroad. I hope to see you all in December in South Korea for the ICA conference, of course. But COVID permitting, obviously. I wish you all a wonderful evening, and thank you so much.
Great to
Thank
meet
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Take
Yeah.
care.
Thank you so much. It was great to meet you all.
Thank you.